On incumbency and redistricting for Congress. Okay, a little bit different in both House and the Senate, but we'll make sense of it and why it occurs and how it occurs. So what we're going to kind of look at here is the behaviors and what influences their elections. Maybe partisanship creates the divided government as well. Looking at rates for the U.S. House, pretty high. Even in 18, about 90 something percent incumbency rates, meaning the incumbent won re-election. And very similar in the Senate as well. But again, their elections are every 6 years, so it could be a little bit different. Looking at just the makeup of Congress before we get into it, the percentage of women in each the House and the Senate. Looking at diversity, racial and ethnic diversity in Congress, the amount of individuals of non-white members in the U.S. Senate and House. And then religious makeup. Religion will also play a role when becoming elected to the U.S. Congress. So what is reapportionment then? Reapportionment happens every 10 years. So this year, 2020, it is occurring because there's a census. So they're going to look at the amount of people in each state and their population. Again, the House is based on population, so that's why the census is very important. That's why states are pushing it. So based on that, the population and the calculations that they make and the equation they use, you may lose or gain seats in the U.S. House, which then affects your electoral college votes. When it comes to reapportionment, then, if your state gains or loses a seat, Congress can redistrict. Congress draws the lines in their congressional districts based on state, and a lot of times this is done, most times, by the state legislature, which will play a very, very important role. So every 10 years, they'll redraw the lines, and it will come into effect in the next election, federal election, 2 years after the census. When state legislatures then redraw these lines, they do something that's called gerrymandering. It creates districts that favor a political party over one or the other. So they're going to redraw the maps if they need to, and the state legislature, whatever party dominates that time, will redraw to strengthen their party. They want to get a majority of the seats to be that party if they can, and they want to weaken the other side. Okay, so also they want to find spots where very strong career politicians, which are leaders of the party, can easily win. There's a quick video explaining this, looking at gerrymandering. One of the key cases here in gerrymandering is Baker versus Carr. This is one of your required court cases. This was in 1962. So we're looking at the Tennessee population. It was shifting, it was changing. A lot of individuals were moving towards the cities. Okay? But legislative districts were still the same. They were not being redrawn. So urban areas with a lot more people had the same amount of representation of those in the rural areas. Charles Baker sued the Secretary of State for equal representation. A lot more people are voting in certain districts, which means their voice isn't as loud. So what happened here in a 6-2 majority decision in favor of Baker, they used the 14th Amendment, using the Equal Protection Clause, because they needed to have a reapportionment lawsuit or case here, and they needed to do that for the state because the numbers were so swayed. Established right now, then, the right for federal courts to review these different issues when it comes to redistricting, which had previously said it was more of a political question, so they wouldn't bring it to the courts, but they now allow the courts to view these things. So the court's willingness to address legislative reapportionment in Tennessee then paves the way for the idea that one man, one vote. So each district should be somewhat close to equal when it comes to population, so everyone's vote is the same, so that the representative democracy is actually being used. Another case is Wesberry versus Sanders. When we're talking about reapportionment and districting in Georgia, they had uneven congressional districts based on county lines. So they just use counties, so it depends on your population. Supreme Court ruled that population differences among those districts were so great that they violated that one man, one vote, or one person, one vote. So the precedent was set by Baker versus Carr, and they couldn't just use county lines because some counties have a lot more people. Another required case, this is the redrawing of congressional districts in North Carolina. This is Shaw versus Reno in 1990. They created a 12th district, if you look at the picture there, designed to get an African American elected. They just kind of created one district so that one African American could get elected in that district, and they ruled that the district was unlawful. It was not contiguous or compact. Okay, so you also have to draw lines that are more compact than this. And then in Hunt versus Cromartie, they ruled by when they're looking at, if we go back, if we're looking at Shaw versus Reno, you have to draw districts as well, and can't be solely based on race. And that kind of comes out in Hunt versus Cromartie, where race cannot be the controlling factor. You can't just draw a district where race is a controlling factor, but it can be one of the factors. Right? So if there's an African American that you're trying to get elected, well, you can look at a political party and say, well, we're trying to get a majority district that's Democrat possibly, and that also could allow an African American to be elected. And then looking at the FRQ, so just kind of looking at the idea incumbency in the House and the Senate. Using this chart, identify two patterns displayed in the graph. Identify two factors that contribute to incumbency advantage. So what are the advantages to being someone who's an incumbent, who's already in office, and explain how each factor contributes to that advantage. And then lastly, discuss one consequence of incumbency advantage for the United States political process. How is the re-election rate of over 90% of these incumbents possibly affecting the political process?